Welcome back. This channel exists because of your support. Subscribe, hit like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now let's get into the story. Some arguments build slowly, starting with a small complaint that spirals into something bigger. This one didn't work like that. This one started with Whitney slamming her wine glass on the table and announcing that every single one of her friends had tried to warn her about marrying me. And here she was, trapped in what she called a pathetic excuse for a marriage. Yeah, just like that. No warm-up, just straight to the throat. I was sitting there, halfway through some leftover lasagna from that place in the north and we used to go to when things were good, when Whitney launched into what sounded like a speech she'd been rehearsing for weeks. She looked me dead in the eye and said those exact words. The way she said pathetic marriage, with such venom, you'd think I'd been cheating on her or stealing from her for years. But no, my biggest crime was apparently being the guy she chose to marry 6 years ago. She didn't stop there. Oh no, she was just getting started. She stood up from the table and started pacing around the dining room. We had a separate dining area off the kitchen, and our apartment in Beacon Hill isn't huge, so basically she was walking in circles around where I was still sitting, fork in hand, trying to figure out if I should keep eating or put the food down. I decided to keep eating. Something told me this was going to be a long performance, and I might need the energy. You want to know what they told me? She asked, but it wasn't really a question. She was going to tell me whether I wanted to hear it or not. She pulled out her phone and actually started reading from her notes app. Notes. About our marriage. About me. That's when I knew this wasn't just another argument. This was something she'd been planning. 9 pieces of advice, she said, holding up her fingers like she was teaching a kindergarten class. 9 warnings that could have saved me from this situation. From being trapped here with someone who clearly isn't what I need. Trapped. That word hit different. Not unhappy, not frustrated, not even angry. Trapped. Like I was some kind of prison warden and she was serving a sentence she didn't deserve. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was the one who'd been working my tail off to keep us comfortable while she spent her days complaining to these friends about how terrible her life was. But sure, she was the one who was trapped. Number 1, she began, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Never marry a man whose career has plateaued by 30. That's what Jessica told me right after you proposed. She said I needed someone on a trajectory, someone with ambition, not someone making comfortable money who would never be wealthy. I took another bite of lasagna. It was getting cold, but I kept chewing. Number 2, never move into his space. Always start fresh together. Caroline said that one. But no, we moved into your apartment to save money. And now I feel like a guest in my own home. I never got to decorate. I never got to make this place ours. It's always been yours. She was really getting into it now, her voice rising with each point. I noticed she wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at her phone, at her carefully prepared notes. Number 3, never marry someone who prioritizes work-life balance over success. You leave work at 5:30 every single day. You never work weekends. Do you know what Brianna's fiancé does? He works 70-hour weeks. He's a partner track at his firm. That's drive. That's ambition. What you have is contentment with mediocrity. That one almost made me laugh. Almost. Because the same woman who was now lecturing me about ambition was the one who complained every time I had to work late. The same woman who wanted me home for dinner every night was now upset that I actually came home. Number 4, never accept a proposal without a significant ring. Your grandmother's ring was sweet, sure, meaningful, but it's worth maybe $3,000. Kelly's engagement ring cost $18,000. Caroline's was $25,000. The ring shows what a man values his marriage at. I paused, fork hovering over my plate. Not because I was angry, but because I wanted to see where this was going. How much lower could we get? Number 5, never marry someone who won't fight for the relationship. When we argue, you stay calm. You use logic. You never raise your voice. Jessica says that shows you don't care enough to fight, that your calmness is actually indifference. Number 6, never marry a man who expects you to work full-time. I should have found someone who could support me. Someone who could give me the option to work or not, to pursue hobbies, to have freedom. Instead, I'm trapped in a job I hate just to make ends meet. She paused there, glancing up from her phone to see my reaction. I didn't give her one. Not yet. Number 7, never settle for someone who doesn't make you feel special. Where are the surprise gifts? The grand gestures? The romantic trips to Paris? We go camping for our anniversary. Camping. Like we're college students who can't afford better. Number 8. Never marry someone your friends don't approve of. They never warmed to you, Greg. And I should have listened to why. They could see things I was too in love to see. They were trying to protect me. She took a breath before the last one, and I could tell this was her grand finale. Number 9. Never marry without a backup plan. I should have kept my own savings separate. Should have maintained my options. Should have protected myself in case things didn't work out. But no, I trusted you. I trusted us. And now look where I am. She set her phone down on the table with a decisive click and crossed her arms. The silence that followed was heavy. She stood there, waiting for me to respond, waiting for me to defend myself, or apologize, or beg her to reconsider, waiting for me to do exactly what a mediocre man with no ambition would do when faced with such a thorough catalog of his failures. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I looked up at her and asked a simple question. So what do you want to do about it? The question caught her completely off guard. Her mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time since she'd started this whole speech, she seemed to have lost her prepared remarks. What do you mean? She finally asked. I mean exactly what I said. You've just spent the last 15 minutes explaining to me that our marriage is a mistake, that I'm not what you need, and that you've wasted 6 years of your life on someone who can't give you what you deserve. So what do you want to do about it? She opened her mouth again, but no words came out. The silence stretched between us for what felt like forever. I don't know, she finally stammered. I hadn't really thought about what comes next. I just needed you to understand how I feel, how trapped I've been feeling. And that's when something clicked for me. She hadn't thought about what comes next because this whole speech wasn't about finding solutions. It was about making me feel as small and inadequate as she'd apparently been feeling. It was about transferring her dissatisfaction from her shoulders to mine, making her unhappiness my responsibility to fix. I stood up slowly, picking up my plate from the table. Well, that's interesting, I said, keeping my voice level. You've spent all this time thinking about how wrong our marriage is, but no time thinking about how to make it right, or whether you even want to make it right. She followed me into the kitchen. I could feel her energy changing. The confidence she'd had while delivering her prepared remarks was starting to crack. Of course I want to make it right, she said. That's why I'm talking to you about this. That's why I'm being honest about what I need. I turned to face her, leaning against the sink. No, you're being honest about what your friends think you should need. There's a difference. Don't try to turn this around on them, she snapped. They're just looking out for me. They can see things I've been too close to see. Like what exactly? I asked. What terrible things have they observed about our marriage that you've been blind to? She stopped pacing and crossed her arms. Then she started moving again, but this time it looked less like a prosecutor making her case and more like someone trying to remember lines she'd forgotten. Like the fact that you're content with ordinary, she said. Like the fact that you don't push yourself to achieve more, to provide more, to be more. I nodded slowly. So your friends think I should be more ambitious, more successful, wealthier, presumably. It's not about money, she said, but the way she said it told me it was absolutely about money. Then what is it about? It's about drive. It's about having goals beyond just getting by. And what goals do you have? I asked. Beyond marrying someone who makes more money than I do, I mean. That stopped her pacing. What do you mean? I mean, in all these conversations with your friends about how inadequate I am, what did you tell them about your own goals, your own ambitions, your own plans for contributing to this better life you think you deserve? She stared at me like I'd asked her to solve advanced calculus in her head. I contribute plenty to this relationship, she finally said. I'm not talking about what you contribute, I said. I'm talking about what you want to achieve, what you want to build, what legacy you want to leave behind that doesn't depend on being married to someone who makes more money. The question hung in the air between us. I could see her struggling with it, not because it was hard to answer, but because she'd never really thought about it. Her entire framework for evaluating our marriage was based on what I wasn't providing, not on what she was creating. That's not the point, she finally said. The point is that I followed my heart instead of my head. And now I'm paying the price for that mistake. Okay, I said. So you made a mistake. You married the wrong person for the wrong reasons. You ignored good advice from people who cared about you. You ended up in a situation that doesn't meet your needs or expectations. She nodded, seeming relieved that I was finally understanding her position. So the question remains, I continued. What do you want to do about it? Because I'm hearing a lot about the problem, but nothing about the solution. I want you to understand, she said. I want you to acknowledge that things need to change. I want you to step up and be the husband I need you to be. There it was. The real agenda behind this whole performance. She didn't want to leave. She wanted to remake me. She wanted to use her friend's criticism as a crowbar to pry me into a different shape, to pressure me into becoming someone I'd never been and never wanted to be. And if I can't be that person, I asked, if I can't step up to meet these standards that your friends have set for my life? She looked genuinely confused by the question. What do you mean if you can't? Anyone can improve themselves if they really want to. Anyone can try harder, do better, be more successful. I smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. You're right. Anyone can try to be more successful. The question is whether I want to try to be more successful for you, or for someone who actually appreciates what I already bring to the table. Now she looked worried. This wasn't the direction she'd expected the conversation to go. She'd expected resistance followed by capitulation followed by promises to do better. She hadn't expected me to start questioning whether she was worth the effort. What are you saying? She asked. I'm saying that maybe your friends were right about one thing. Maybe you did make a mistake. Maybe you did settle for something that doesn't make you happy. And maybe the best thing for both of us would be to fix that mistake. Her face went pale. Fix it how? By giving you exactly what you said you wanted. Freedom from this pathetic marriage. Freedom to find someone who meets all 9 of your friends' criteria. Freedom to live the life you think you deserve with someone who can actually provide it. She took a step back. That's not what I meant. I don't want to end our marriage. I want to improve it. Based on standards set by people who aren't married to me, I pointed out. Based on advice from people who apparently think I'm not good enough for you. Based on requirements that were never part of our original agreement. The kitchen fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. This time I was the one in control of the conversation. I went to bed that night in the spare room we used as my home office. Whitney stayed in our bedroom, probably expecting me to come apologize at some point. But I didn't. I lay there in the dark on the futon I kept for when I worked late, staring at the ceiling, and realized something important. I deserved better than someone who kept a running list of my inadequacies. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Whitney was still asleep when I got up, which was perfect because I had some things to take care of before she started her day. I made my coffee, sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop, and started working through the list of changes that needed to happen. If she wanted to experience what life would be like following her friend's 9 pieces of advice, I was going to help her get the full experience. First stop, the bank. I logged into our joint accounts and started the process of separating our finances. Not stealing, not hiding money, just creating the independence she'd apparently been craving all along. I moved my direct deposits to a new individual account and left enough in the joint account to cover her portion of the bills for the next month. Fair and clean. Next, I called our credit card companies. The cards where she was an authorized user on my accounts were getting canceled. Nothing vindictive about it. She wanted financial independence, and part of independence is managing your own credit, your own spending, your own financial decisions without relying on someone else's creditworthiness. Then I pulled up our monthly expenses and created a detailed breakdown of exactly what it costs to maintain our current lifestyle. We rented, so our monthly payment was $2,800 for rent. Utilities averaged $200. Internet and streaming services, another $150. Groceries, around $600. Insurance, both renters and car, another $300. I divided it all based on our individual incomes. I made $95,000 a year. She made $42,000. That meant she was responsible for about 44% of our household costs. Her friends thought 50-50 was unfair when incomes weren't equal. Fine. She could pay her proportional share and see how that worked out. By the time she wandered into the kitchen around 8:30, I had everything organized in a neat folder labeled Independence Plan. She looked confused when she saw me sitting there with papers spread out across the table. What's all this? She asked, pouring herself coffee. Your freedom, I said, sliding the folder across to her. I spent the morning thinking about what you said last night. And you're absolutely right. You deserve to experience what life would have been like if you'd followed your friend's advice. She opened the folder cautiously, like it might contain something dangerous. What do you mean? I mean, I'm giving you exactly what they told you to want. Financial independence, separate accounts, proportional bill paying. The whole package. No more joint anything. No more shared responsibilities. No more feeling trapped by our combined finances. She flipped through the papers, her expression getting more confused with each page. This says you closed our joint credit cards. Correction. I removed you as an authorized user from my credit cards. You're free to apply for your own cards now. Build your own credit history. Make your own financial decisions without any input from me. But these monthly expenses, she said, holding up the breakdown I'd created. This says I owe over $1,800 just for my share of the house costs. That's based on proportional income, which you said was the fair way to split things. Your income is about 44% of our combined income, so you're responsible for 44% of our combined expenses. Math is beautiful that way. She stared at the numbers like they were written in a foreign language. I can't afford this. My salary doesn't leave room for $1,800 in house costs, plus my own food, gas, and everything else. I nodded sympathetically. I know. That's probably why your friends suggested marrying someone who could cover all the major costs while anything you contributed would be considered a bonus. Unfortunately, you didn't follow that advice, so now you get to experience the alternative. This is ridiculous, she said, but her voice lacked the conviction she'd had the night before. You're being petty and vindictive. Actually, I'm being helpful. You said you felt trapped in a marriage where you were expected to contribute equally when you weren't earning equally. So I fixed that. Now you're contributing proportionally, and you're free to make all your own decisions about how you spend your money. She sat down heavily in the chair across from me. This isn't what I meant. Then what did you mean? Because last night you gave me a very detailed list of everything that was wrong with our arrangement. This morning I fixed those problems. I thought you'd be grateful. I meant that things needed to improve, not that everything needed to be separated. I leaned back in my chair. See, that's the interesting thing about advice. Your friends weren't telling you how to improve our marriage. They were telling you how to avoid being in our marriage in the first place. There's a difference. She was quiet for a long moment, still staring at the papers. So what happens now? Now you get to experience all 9 pieces of advice simultaneously. You get to maintain your own apartment if you want one. You get to manage your own finances completely. You get to make decisions based on what you want, not what we want as a couple. You get to explore your options and figure out what you actually want from life. And what about us? She asked. What about us? According to you, there is no us. There's just you, trapped in a pathetic marriage with someone who can't provide the life you deserve. Well, now you're not trapped anymore. She looked up at me then, and I could see something that looked like panic starting to creep into her eyes. You're talking like we're getting divorced. I'm talking like we're getting real about what this relationship actually is instead of what we've been pretending it is. You want to keep living here? Fine, but you'll be living here as an independent adult who pays her own way and makes her own decisions. You want to explore other options? Also fine. Your friends think you should have kept a backup plan. Now you can develop one without feeling guilty about it. She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up my hand. Before you say anything else, I want you to understand something. Last night wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't a request for changes or improvements. It was a verdict. You told me that our marriage was a mistake, that I wasn't good enough, and that you'd wasted 6 years of your life settling for mediocrity. Okay, message received. Now I'm responding to that verdict in the most helpful way I can think of, by giving you the freedom to end it yourself if that's what you really want, or to fix it if that's actually possible. But either way, you'll be doing it as an independent person making your own choices, not as someone who feels trapped by circumstances. She stared at me for a long time. Finally, she asked, what if I don't want this kind of independence? I smiled. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you spent last night explaining to me exactly why our current arrangement was such a terrible mistake. The first week was interesting, to say the least. Whitney tried to maintain her usual spending habits while completely ignoring the new financial reality. Dinners out with her friends, her monthly manicure appointment, a new dress she didn't need. By Wednesday, she was checking her bank balance obsessively. The following Wednesday night, exactly 1 week after I'd presented the independence plan, was particularly memorable. She'd gone to dinner with her advisory committee at Committee, this trendy restaurant on Congress Street where they usually met up. I was home, making myself a simple pasta dish, when my phone rang. It was Whitney, and she sounded furious. What did you do? She demanded. I'm making dinner. What did you do? My card was declined. In front of everyone. Jessica, Caroline, Brianna, Kelly, all of them. The waiter had to take my card away and come back to tell me it didn't work. That's because it's not your card anymore, I said calmly. Did you apply for your own cards like I suggested? There was a long pause. Yes, they approved me for $2,500. That's great. So use that card. I already did. I'm at my limit. In 3 days? Another pause. I had some things I needed to buy. I didn't ask what things. I didn't need to know. Well, that's part of financial independence. Managing your credit responsibly. Living within your means. Greg, I'm sitting here humiliated. Can you please just fix this? There's nothing to fix, Whitney. This is how it works now. You have your money, I have mine. If you can't afford dinner, you'll need to tell your friends that. She hung up on me. I finished my pasta in peace. Over the next few days, I could hear her on the phone in the other room, having increasingly desperate conversations with those same friends. The women who had been so generous with criticism of our marriage were suddenly very busy when she needed practical help. Thursday evening, I heard her ask, "Can't you just stay at my place for a few days?" There was a long pause. "Oh, your mother-in-law is visiting for 3 weeks. Of course." Friday brought another call. "I know you said I should keep my own apartment, but I'm wondering if maybe I could crash on your couch until I find something." Another pause. "Your landlord doesn't allow overnight guests for more than 3 days. That's really specific." The best one came over the weekend, when she called the friend who had apparently been most vocal about the backup plan advice. "Remember when you said I should always have an exit strategy? Well, I'm ready to activate that strategy, and I was hoping." Long pause. "You're seeing someone exclusively now, and it would be weird. But I thought you said relationships should always stay flexible." By Sunday, she was spending hours staring at apartment listings on her laptop, and I could see her doing mental math that wasn't adding up the way she'd hoped. The breaking point came the following Thursday evening, 2 weeks after the initial confrontation. I was making dinner for myself, some steak tips I'd been marinating, when she walked into the kitchen and just stood there watching me cook. Not asking for anything, not saying anything, just standing there with this expression like she was trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. "Smells good," she finally said. "Thanks. There's sandwich stuff in the fridge if you're hungry." "I'm not hungry," she said, but she kept standing there. "I've been thinking about what you said, about giving me the freedom to fix things or end things." I kept stirring the steak tips, not looking at her. "And I think maybe we rushed into this separation thing. Maybe we should have tried working on the problems instead of just dividing everything up." "What problems?" I asked. "According to you, the problem was that you married the wrong person. How exactly do you work on that without one of us becoming someone completely different?" She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded." "You didn't mean what? That our marriage was pathetic? That you'd wasted 6 years? That I couldn't provide the life you deserved? Because you were pretty specific about all of that." "I meant that I was frustrated. I meant that I was feeling stuck and didn't know how to express it properly." I turned to look at her then. "So you expressed it by telling me that your friends think I'm inadequate and that you should have listened to their advice to never marry me in the first place. That's not what you said?" "That's not what I said. Actually, that's exactly what you said. Word for word. I have a pretty good memory for conversations that change everything." She leaned against the counter, looking more deflated than I'd seen her since this whole thing started. "I've been trying to find my own place, and everything in our price range is either terrible or way out in the suburbs. And the decent places want first month, last month, and a security deposit that's more than I make in 2 months." "That does sound challenging," I said, turning back to my cooking. "Have you considered getting a roommate? That's what most single people do when they can't afford to live alone." "I don't want a roommate. I want—" She trailed off. "You want what?" "I want to come home to someone who cares about me. I want to share dinner with someone who knows how my day went. I want to sleep next to someone who makes me feel safe and loved." I plated my dinner and sat down at the table. "Those are all reasonable things to want. The question is whether you want them with me, or whether you want them with someone who meets your friend's criteria for an acceptable husband." "I want them with you," she said quietly. "Even though I'm ordinary and mediocre and can't provide the life you deserve." "I didn't mean those things." "Yes, you did. And you know what? That's okay. You're allowed to want more than what our marriage provides. You're allowed to think you settled for less than you deserved. You're allowed to regret the choices you made. But you're not allowed to take it back just because living with the consequences turned out to be harder than you expected. She sat down across from me, and I could see her eyes getting watery. So that's it. You've just written off 6 years of marriage because of one bad conversation. I haven't written off anything. I've just stopped pretending that one bad conversation was an isolated incident. You've been unhappy for months, maybe years. You've been discussing our problems with your friends instead of with me. You've been comparing our life to some imaginary alternative that your advisory committee convinced you was possible. But people can change, she said. Marriages can improve. We can work on the problems. What problems specifically? Because the problems you outlined weren't things that could be fixed with counseling or better communication. They were fundamental incompatibilities between who I am and who you think I should be. She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. Finally, she looked up at me. What if I was wrong? What if I let my friends get in my head and convince me that I was settling when I actually had something good? I finished my dinner before answering. When I did, I kept my voice level and calm. Then you'll have learned an expensive lesson about the difference between advice and wisdom. And maybe next time you'll think twice before letting other people evaluate your marriage for you. Next time? She asked, and her voice cracked a little. Next relationship, I clarified. Because this one is over. Not because I'm angry or hurt or trying to punish you, but because you made it very clear that you don't respect what we built together. And I have too much self-respect to spend the rest of my life trying to convince someone that I'm worth being married to. She started crying then. Not the angry tears from our fight last week, but the kind of crying that comes when you realize you've made a mistake that can't be undone. Please don't do this. Please don't give up on us. I stood up and cleared my plate. I'm not giving up on us. There is no us anymore. There's just you, finally free to follow all 9 pieces of advice your friends gave you. And me, finally free to find someone who doesn't need a committee to tell her whether I'm worth loving. The next few days passed in cold silence. We moved around the apartment like ghosts, existing in the same space, but living completely separate lives. She went to work, came home, stared at apartment listings on her laptop. I cooked for myself, ate alone, and made calls to a divorce lawyer. The divorce papers were sitting on the kitchen table when she came downstairs on Friday morning. I'd had them prepared during those quiet days. Nothing complicated since we'd already separated our finances and didn't have kids or major assets to fight over. Clean, simple, final. She saw them immediately and froze in the doorway. What are these? Your freedom papers, I said, not looking up from my coffee and phone. Everything you said you wanted, all official and legal. She picked them up with shaking hands. You can't be serious. Dead serious. I've been thinking about your situation all week, and I realized I hadn't given you my advice yet. You shared 9 pieces of advice from your friends, but I never got to contribute to the conversation. Your advice? She asked, sinking into the chair across from me. Just 1 piece. Much simpler than 9. Much easier to remember. I set my phone down and looked at her directly. Here it is. When you tell someone they're not good enough for you, believe them when they agree with you. Her face went pale. That's not what I meant. Of course it is. You spent an entire evening explaining exactly why I wasn't the husband you needed. Why our marriage was a mistake. Why you'd wasted years settling for mediocrity. Well, I listened. I agreed. And now I'm fixing the problem. By divorcing me. By setting you free to find what you actually want instead of staying trapped with what you don't want. You said yourself that you felt trapped in a pathetic marriage. Problem solved. She started crying again, but this time I didn't feel the usual urge to comfort her. I made a mistake. I was angry and frustrated, and I said things I didn't mean. You said things you'd been thinking for months, maybe years. You said things your friends had been telling you to say. The only mistake you made was thinking I'd stick around to be your backup plan while you figured out whether you could do better. That's not fair. I stood up and refilled my coffee cup. Fair would have been having this conversation before you spent months complaining about me to your friends. Fair would have been working on our problems together instead of getting validation for your dissatisfaction from people who wanted to see us fail. They don't want to see us fail. Really? Because when you needed actual help these past few weeks, where were they? When you needed a place to stay or someone to help with expenses or even just emotional support, how available was your advisory committee? She didn't answer because we both knew the answer. The papers are straightforward, I continued. No alimony since we've been married under 10 years. No fighting over property. No drama. You get your complete independence. I get my self-respect back. Everybody wins. I don't want independence, she whispered. I want my husband back. Your husband was never good enough for you. Remember? I'm just the guy who was convenient until something better came along. Well, now you're free to find that something better. She looked at me with desperation in her eyes. What if I fire my friends? What if I stop listening to their advice and start focusing on us? I almost smiled at that. You can't unfry an egg. You can't unsay words that came from months of resentment. And you definitely can't convince someone to stay married to you after you've spent an evening explaining why they're inadequate. People forgive worse things than this. People forgive mistakes made in anger. They don't forgive systematic campaigns to tear down their self-worth. There's a difference. She stared at the papers for a long time. So this is really it. 6 years of marriage ends because of one bad night. 6 years of marriage ends because you decided it should end. I'm just making it official. And there's nothing I can say to change your mind? I looked at her one last time. This woman who had shared my bed and my life and my dreams for 6 years before deciding it wasn't enough. You already said everything that mattered. The only thing left is my response. She signed the papers that afternoon. By evening, she was making calls, her voice desperate as she tried to figure out where to go and how to afford it. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched her scramble. She found a room in Jamaica Plain with 2 grad students she barely knew. She called her parents and borrowed money for the deposit, a conversation I heard through the bedroom door that left her crying for an hour. She packed her things slowly, one box at a time, each item a small surrender. The day she finally moved out, I helped her carry boxes to the U-Haul. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? When the last box was loaded, she stood in the empty bedroom one more time, then walked out without looking back. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. 3 months after she moved out, I ran into Caroline on Boston Common. She was walking her dog, and when she saw me, she looked like she wanted to cross the street. But she didn't. She walked over. Hey, Greg. How are you? Good, I said. You? Fine. I heard about everything. I'm sure you did. There was an awkward pause. For what it's worth, Caroline said. I think Whitney realized she made a mistake. I nodded. What mistake? Marrying me or divorcing me? Caroline looked uncomfortable. I should go. Tell her I hope she's doing well, I said. I mean it. That evening, I was in my apartment alone. The Patriots draft was on TV. I had a beer in hand. My phone buzzed with a text from Whitney. Caroline said she ran into you. Hope you're doing okay. I looked at the message for a long time. Started to type a response. Deleted it. Started again. Deleted it again. Finally, I just turned off my phone. I looked around my apartment. Small but mine. Quiet but peaceful. No one counting my inadequacies. No one comparing me to someone else's husband. No one keeping a list of everything I wasn't. Just me, living my ordinary life. Working my 9-to-5 job. Making my comfortable money. Prioritizing my work-life balance. And for the first time in years, maybe the first time in my entire marriage, I felt like that was enough. Dear listeners, that's our ending. If it resonated, subscribe to support the channel. See you next time.